G'day, I've just finished making that. I'm going to call it my gumnut ball, and that's the project for this week. But I've made this to showcase this. Yep, another sphere cutter, but this would have to be the Rolls Royce of all sphere cutters, made by Vermec Engineering in Brisbane, Australia. Excellent tool, beautifully made. So let's see how this performs. So let's have a closer look at the Vermec Sphere Cutter. We'll start from the base. Here we have a very substantial chunk of steel to hold everything solid and rigid. This can be interchanged according to the size lathe that you got. We have two locking levers. This one is a cam, lifted to that point there, which is about 45 degrees, and it will slide this way. Move it around like that, lock it in place. This locking lever here locks the tool support arm and prevents that from pivoting. Now you might wonder why that needs to be done. Well, I'll show you a bit later on. Now we've got this spike or this needle here, this point. Now that point is the very center of our radius or the pivot point when we come to move the arm like so. So this helps us get the sphere cutter positioned exactly the right spot according to the piece of wood that you've got on the lathe. The tool post support arm, this section of steel here, is once again very solid, very rigid. It's not going to move, and it supports the tool post. Now the tool post can be moved in and out, so there's a lot of room for this tool post to be moved in and out, and we can move this quite easily in and out by first locking that lever there, grabbing the right size spanner. This is a 17mm spanner, undoing the nut underneath here, and that enables that to be moved backwards and forwards like so. Getting that in the right position, once again according to the size sphere that we want to cut. With the tool support locked in place, I can tighten that nut up underneath, and all further adjustments are done using this black knob at the back. So that tool will go in and out according to the adjustments we make here. So the Vermec Sphere Cutter comes with a tungsten carbide cutter tip, and we can obviously, just by simply undoing or loosening that screw there, rotate the cutter around to expose a sharper edge if we ever find that one edge gets a little bit blunt. So basically that's the sphere cutter, and now all we need to do is actually put it into practice. So let's get a few things set up. Now the starting point for my gumnut ball was to get a scrap piece of timber, some radiata pine in my case here. I've turned a little bit of a spigot here to hold this in the jaws of my chuck. I've turned a bit of a flange on the end here so that the PVC pipe will slide over onto this pine block. I've wrapped some tape around here to seal that seam in there. Once all that is done, filled the space up with gumnuts, and then I've filled it with resin. Let that cure, and now I'm ready to actually turn the sphere. Before I do that, I don't want to actually be turning the PVC pipe, so I'm going to just run a cut, just a handsaw down here, open up that PVC pipe, take that off. So I'll go and do that now. So here I've got the cut that I've just made with the handsaw. I find that with the PVC pipe, that the first time you use it, it actually releases from the resin quite easily. So there's no release agent used here, and that's as simple as it comes out, like so. I think there is actually a residue of a release agent left over from the manufacturing process. So that can actually be reused if I wanted to. Put that to one side. And here is my block of resin and gumnuts. It's actually a variety of gumnuts, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this looks, and I can put that in the jaws of my chuck. Now before I get the sphere cutter set up into this, I'm going to actually just take a bit of wood off the sides here, just down here, to actually get the starting shape of that sphere established first. So I've done a bit of shaping here. I didn't explain why I've used this scrap piece of wood here. Well, if I didn't have that scrap piece of wood, then all of that would be resin and gum nuts, and that would just be a waste of resin. I can now get rid of my tailstock and bring my live center in, but what I'm going to do with my tool rest is put it up to the headstock end of my lathe and just leave it there in case I need it a bit later on. So I can get rid of this tailstock and start setting up the sphere cutter. So I've got the tailstock out of the way. Sphere cutter is not in place yet. I first of all need to just slide the whole unit along, and I'm squatting down here and getting the point, the center point, lined up with, and now you probably can't see this, but I'm lining that up with this line here. So the point that I showed you earlier on is now lined up with the center line. I can now lock my base in place. I can unlock that support arm, and this is loose, and I can start to get this in place. Now I'm going to wind the black knob back as far as it can go so that I've got as much travel in that as possible, and get this cutter close to the touching the actual resin block. Now with that in place, I can then tighten that lever up, so I can then tighten the tool post up, which I'm doing now. So that's tight. Loosen this lever off and we're ready to go. You can see where it touches just here and down there. Now what you tend to do, especially with a piece of timber, this is not so important because we haven't got any grain here, but you tend to work from the equator down to the pole so that you're cutting with the grain effectively. Lathe speed doesn't need to be really fast, and I'm going to back off the cutter just a little bit so that I can cut down here and then around here. So now winding the black knob in and a bit off here. I'm going at about 1000 RPM, a couple of rotations of that. Go in again, go right around. And now we can see here that we've got a lot of wood to take off, and it's really hard going with this, which is why we've got the tool rest still in place. We can bring that along, use our standard tools to get this wood out of the way. I'm not going to worry about that for the moment. I'm just going to try and get this shaped. The thing that's really good about this Vermec Sphere Cutter is that everything is so solid. There's no flex in the whole unit whatsoever. So I'll do a little bit more work, and you can come back a little bit later on when it's more like a sphere. I've made a little bit more progress with the sphere, with getting it shaped. Now what I'm doing here is just working on this side, going all the way around. Make sure that the cutter goes right down to the pole, like so. And I'm just reminded of another thing here, and that is that the cutter height, the height of the cutter, and I'll just turn the lathe off, the height of the cutter is extremely important, and it is, the cutter itself is finishing right in the very center, or the pole itself, and obviously that is a very important thing, or otherwise you just end up with a bit of a spigot just here, and you can never get rid of that. Now that is adjusted quite easily, and there's a little collar down here, a little grub screw in the collar, a bit of an Allen key in there. Loosen that collar off and adjust the whole tool post up and down so that you can get your cutter bang in the middle. Now with the lathe off, I'm going to make sure I back that tool the cutter itself right off like so it's not touching, and I'm going to bring the tool rest back into play so I can just with my spindle gouge get rid of a bit of this extra stuff here. Don't want to get too small here. Down here, I've still got a little bit to do here. It doesn't hurt to actually support things with your hand. I've just got a little bit of a dent in here that was made by my live centre, so wouldn't mind getting rid of that. So I've now basically got this cutter in the right spot. I don't need to keep advancing it. All I need to do is get more wood off here, or more resin and gum nuts off there. Might just take one more cut here. That'll do. And now around here, all I'm doing is taking, or trying to get this out here. Back that off. Get that out of the way. Turn the lathe off. Get the tool rest back in here so that I can get rid of some of this with my spindle gouge. And if you don't like spindle gouges like that, you think that's a bit, just go in there gently with a parting tool, taking small cuts. I'm not using the whole width of the cutting edge there, just, well, initially I am, but just small cuts. Once again, I'm going to back the cutter off. I'm a bit concerned that that ball is going to break off here. It's still quite solid, and if you were doing this out of timber, then that would be, or how strong that is going to be dependent on your timber itself. So lathe back on again. I need to get rid of this. Now that pine's not particularly strong. And I'm going to support this time. And there we have it. Now we've got to try and sand this, and we've also got to get rid of that little bit of a spigot there. So we're going to use this to turn a bit of a cove in there. It's a bit of a hollow in there, so we can hold this in there like that, bring the tailstock up, make something for the other end, hold it in there like so, so we can clean that up. Need to get rid of this, get this out of the way. Let's do that. Now I'm going to just turn a bit of a hollow in there with a spindle gouge. There it is. Now this edge around here can dent your wood, so you might just want to soften that off. Now there's a variety of ways that you can put a cup on your tailstock end. Now what I have got here is a reversing mandrel. Now Vermec Engineering make this one as well. Fantastic. It's a live reversing mandrel, or it's basically a thread, the same thread as I have on my other end, on my headstock end. And it means that I can put anything that I can put on my headstock on my tailstock. Now I've got this piece of timber, and I've actually cut a thread into there so that can wind onto there nicely. But I've also, prior to doing that, I've actually put a cup in there like so. So that can get wound on to my reversing mandrel. Very handy things, these reversing mandrels. And now I can use this to support that ball like so. Tighten that up with the tailstock. And look at that, it's spinning beautifully. Now I'm going to bring the lathe off. I'm going to bring my tool rest in. because all I've got to do is just take off that little bit of a spigot here, make sure it doesn't hit the tool rest, and I'm going to attack that with a spindle gouge, just lightly take that off. There it is, and now I can get sanding this, and you wait for this to come up absolutely beautifully. So I'm just going to work through my grits. I'll probably start at 80 grit and work through this. I'll be able to sand in this area here, turn the lathe off, back my tailstock off, and sand this area in here. Now you can see that this one here in particular has dinted or made a mark in there, so what we might need to do is put some padding in between there with a bit of rag. So I'll just do that, and then we'll get onto the sanding. So I'm almost finished the sanding stage here, and I've gone to this, well, it's another Vermec product. It's their rotary sander, and it's easily one of the best rotary sanders I've ever used. And I've got 500 grit here. I've done it like so. Turn that off. You'll also notice I've put some padding in here that I've actually glued in place. I just quickly stuck that on with some CA glue, rotate it around, and I can get to this area here and finish that sanding, and then I'll get on with some Triple E. Now I was thinking as I was doing this sanding is that what I could have done is that to avoid having to make up these sorts of things, is I could have actually done the sanding of the majority of the sphere before I parted it off at this end earlier on. So before parting it off, before taking that last little bit of sphere off, I could have done all the sanding, and then I perhaps could have just hand sanded that little bit of a spigot at the very end. Turn that off. And now I'm ready to apply some, as usual, some Triple E. Here I am buffing the sphere, the ball, with a rag. Notice that I've got the end right out of the way. I haven't got it wrapped around my fingers. I'm going to rotate that, tighten that up again. And that last little bit of polishing. How's that? I hope you enjoyed that one. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you another time. Safe turning.